Welcome to the Seeker to Seeker podcast. I'm your host Simeon, and I bring you conversations on the spiritual journey with some of the world's most experienced and interesting seekers. For my original writing, make sure to check out the Seeker to Seeker blog, linked in the description below. Please also consider helping the Seeker to Seeker project grow by subscribing to the channel and signing up for the blog's newsletter. Today's guest is the great contemporary psychonaut Julian Palmer. Julian was born in country northeast Victoria in Australia, and in his early 20s he explored many forms of spiritual inquiry, which eventually led him to psychedelics. Since that time, he hasn't really stopped exploring and learning about psychoactive compounds and the states they catalyze. Julian facilitates non-traditional spaces for psychedelic plant medicine work, and is also the inventor of Changa, which is a type of psychedelic compound described by many as smokable ayahuasca. In our conversation, Julian and I went deeply into a large number of topics, including the role of psychedelics on the spiritual journey, the seemingly real intelligent entities one encounters in deep psychedelic states, the nature of morality and spirituality, and the way the two are often misperceived. We also go into politics, sex, and speculate on the reason behind the existence of elite child-trafficking rings, such as the one discovered in Belgium in the early 2000s. All in all, Julian and I recorded a fascinating conversation, and I'm glad to be sharing it with you. And now here is the inevitable disclaimer that this video, like all other content on the channel, is not intended as promotion of the use of any sort of drugs, nor as propaganda for any specific ideology. Seeker to Seeker is simply a place for dialogue and discussion, and only presents the personal views of the host and guests at the time of the conversations took place. Yet the fact I need to include such a disclaimer makes the poignancy of these conversations all the greater. For the things we feel most uneasy talking about are often the things we really need to be talking about. And finally, before the podcast proper begins, I'll play the trailer for Julian's upcoming documentary about the psychedelic scene in Australia. If you want to learn what ways there are you can support this project, you can check out the links in the description. And as always, thanks for watching and enjoy.
Contemplations is a documentary series that interviews over 50 people in the Australian psychedelic scene and attempts to condense their wisdom and experience into a compelling audio-visual format. The idea behind the documentary was to really record and document the wisdom and understanding that I knew to be there within the Australian psychedelic community, because I've been in this community for a couple of decades. In the early noughties, I created Changa, which is a blend of herbs including ayahuasca, the DMT smoking blend that is fairly common around the world these days. I released a book called Articulations in late 2014 regarding the utilization and meanings of psychedelics, which was really my take on how people can best utilize psychedelics in the most conducive manner. The difference between this documentary series and other audiovisual content on psychedelics is that what we are seeing is a tendency for the conversation to be pushed towards the medicalized model, treating conditions such as PTSD and anxiety and depression. And that's all valid, but in general, psychedelics are extremely valuable for gaining deeper insight into the self. Within the interviews, I wanted to focus on people's experiences and what they had understood and discovered in their many years of exploration. I think these interviews are quite special because they show people opening up about their innermost personal experiences, which are quite rich and compelling and unique. And science isn't telling us much about the internal depths and dimensions regarding how people understand their own subjective states. And this is the real meat and meaning of what people are experiencing. And I think when you listen to someone talking about their internal understanding and their subjective experience, which I think is often devalued, you can get some good contexts and insights into how you can proceed. Some of the most compelling and fascinating content is when people talk about their very high dose experiences, their very deep dives into the mystical and the mysterious. And we really want to do justice to them by animating them and giving people the most compelling visual representation of these stories. This is an opportunity for the community to really come forward and help us to create this documentary series. Your contribution will help us to commission talented animators and audiovisual specialists to allow us to refine and do justice to this project. It's extraordinary and compelling and mind-blowing what people are going to be able to see. And I think a lot of people will have not ever seen this kind of content before.
So, so many things to ask you about, actually, because recently I actually interviewed a person who is kind of very respected in the spirituality sort of sphere, field. And then we touched on psychedelics, and he had a very kind of strong opinion, you know, took a very strong position against the use of psychedelics. Eventually, he asked me to not publish that part of the video because he didn't want to really go public with it. But I think I definitely don't have the experience or knowledge to kind of you know, argue for or against psychedelics. So I think it's good to get your to get you answering some of the common questions or issues or problems people have with psychedelics, and some of the main kind of things people wonder about, you know, how these experiences can be integrated, whether they're healthy for you, can you get attached to them, how do they come into the whole spiritual journey, you know, so all these things. So maybe first to begin, I'm actually curious how you were led to psychedelics initially, because I know many people are led to psychedelics through dealing with some sort of trauma, or they're on the path to, you know, they're seeking something and that leads them to psychedelics. So what was your story?
Well, a lot of people ask me that. They say, how did you get into this? And I was a very curious person, as a lot of teenagers are curious. So I was especially interested in out-of-body experiences from when I was 16. And so I was fascinated by the existence of other worlds and other dimensions, because I grew up in not a particularly exciting aspect of planet Earth, which probably most aspects of planet Earth are not that exciting. Northeast Victoria, near Shepparton and Benalla in Australia. So quite a privileged upbringing in a way, in terms of having food and, you know, on a survival level. But, you know, I grew up in the country, so nothing that exciting going on. And so I was sort of, when I was 16, interested in exploring other dimensions and understanding. And I didn't really question, like, is there a spirit world, you know, in a way? Because my mother and my grandfather had both traveled out of body. And my mum always told me about, and I was like, well, this is a little bit unusual for my mum to say this. She said, there's a yogic technique that I'll teach you one day.
Wow.
And I was like, she never says things like that. That's really weird, right? And I saw books about yoga in the bookshelf, and it's just like people doing handstands and this sort of thing. That's all I knew of yoga. And then she described my grandfather being able to travel out of body when he was a prisoner of war in a camp in Burma, and he traveled out of body to escape the situation. So that was always possible for me. So I started to explore that when I was 16, and I never actually did it, funnily enough, but I was able to. I practiced the state of not thinking, and I got really close. I practiced most nights, but I never actually did it. But something happened to me, because it was like meditation. I started to come closer to myself, and you know what happened when I was 16, that's a big story. But fast forward to when I was 18, traveling through America, I came across Robert A. Monroe's book, Far Journeys, especially. That's what really catalyzed me, reading his book. And I began really taking that book seriously, and the teachings in that book really seriously. And then I bought some LSD in Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, and I took it on a bus journey between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And I initially took one, and then I took another one, and then an hour in, well, nothing had happened an hour later, so I took another two.
Oh no, oh man.
And it was I managed to get off the bus and get back on the bus, but I was really going into some states where time and space and reality were getting warped and shifted. And I listened to music, and I was like, wow, this is something really different. This is something really interesting. Apart from out-of-body experiences, something like, this is showing me something that I'm curious about. So I managed to buy LSD in London, in Leicester Square, and this is 1993. So, and I took it a few times, 100 micrograms, 200 micrograms, and nothing so profound. Then again, I took 400 micrograms at the Reading Festival in 1993. So, you know, this was like sort of like a peak of the, you know, music scene. 1993 was an excellent time for music. Like going out in London and all the bands and everything, it was an excellent time. So that was intense when I took 400 micrograms. I think I saw much deeper into reality, way beyond social constructs, way beyond social conditioning, more into the realm of seeing humanity in terms of the astral plane, and humanity in terms of energy, and humanity in terms of where humanity was really at. So that experience like shocked me to the core, and I didn't really speak for some days after experiencing that. So that's when I was 18. 4 years later, I took LSD again, 200 micrograms. It changed my life completely. I saw a few levels deeper into how humanity worked, the astral engagement and meaning of what's actually going on in a collective level and how the individual relates to that, shocked me to the core. It took me about 4 months to come back to earth.
Wow. So what was different about this experience than before? Because you even took less of the substance.
Because I saw a lot deeper and I had profound revelations that shifted me ontologically and my perspective so profoundly that I had to reassemble and readjust a whole new coordinates. And so I could barely function for a few months. So, people talk about downsides to psychedelics, and I think a lot of people aren't aware that, if you have a big experience, you can be in states of process that may be completely involving. For me, it was. I was working in like web design at the time, but I was more like a leader in the underground. I wasn't making any money, but I was like in the top 100 people, kind of like pushing the boundaries of the web and in the underground. Like top Sydney web design companies didn't want to hire me because they said, look, we just do corporate work and this is boring. You don't want to do this. And I didn't. So I did a little bit of freelance work, but that's about it. And then it was another 2 years before I took not LSD, but I smoked DMT and I took mushrooms. And at that point, I was working in a web design company, and my friend married an Icelandic woman. And so I was free to explore this, because in Australia, at least at that point, I'm sure it's harder then to do it. It wasn't that easy then to do it, to survive on Social Security. But then you had a little bit more money and they didn't require so much from you that they may be now. So I could pretty much, like, from that point on, devote myself to exploring this. And it became clear to me that this is your job now. This is what you're doing. So this was, I'd say this job really began in March year 2000. And the job, it still goes. We're in August 2020. So 20 years later, I'm still doing this work, but it's not so much research now. It's kind of, it's not so much R&D, research and development. But at that point, for me, this was all new. There was only one person that I could find in the whole of Australia extracting DMT. DMT was like a mythical creature then. A lot of people, this is like, people didn't even really ever come into contact with it in countries apart from maybe the Netherlands and Australia, unless you're really well connected. So yeah, I got into that. So I've been into it ever since. That's the long answer.
And what I'm really curious about is how you manage to kind of keep going, because some jobs are like, you show up every day and you do your work. But with psychedelics, you enter some really, really intense states. And some people who have taken psychedelics and have had some like really transformative and profound experiences, they really celebrate that and they try to integrate it. But then if you ask them, do you want to go on another trip? They would say, not anytime soon, because the experience is just so intense. It's not, I think sometimes it's a misconception that, because some people say psychedelics can be a recreational drug, and they can be, but like the truly deep psychedelic experiences are not kind of just entertainment and amusement. They really take a lot out of you. So I'm curious how you sustain this practice of, going in again and again.
Well, for the first 2 years, I was taking something, often oral DMT, DMT with an MAO inhibitor, whether moclobemide or Syrian rue, for 2 or 3 times a week. So I was like
Oh,
full
wow.
time. I was
Wow.
like full time in these states. I was pretty much homeless, like staying wherever I could, staying at friends' places or camping or finding short-term accommodation. I was pretty much on the edge. And so I acclimatized to these states. And after that time, I didn't need to take it so often because I'd had that immersion. But since that time, yeah, I have had super powerful experiences that have taken me 6 months to integrate, and where I might not really take anything. And I think that that's, and I'm not rushing back all the time to keep going in there. But I do think that a lot of Western people, they don't have anything in their lives that's really challenging. They don't have like a jungle, someone described. They don't have a place where there's a wildness, there's an unexpected element in their life. So, I think you have these sort of the movements in our day where people are getting into ice water baths and, that I think that's like an example of an extreme where people are seeking this sort of like this challenge of, doing 20 minutes at 3 degrees or whatever. And I think the psychedelics do present a profound challenge for the mind and the psyche and who you are as a human being. And it doesn't go away. It just changes in nature. So on the one hand, it gets easier. And on the other hand, it gets harder because you're much better at it. You're actually improved in terms of your ability to get the coordinates, your ability to let go, your cosmology and understanding of what's happening. And, it's not like, I wouldn't describe it like, in a way, it's a bit like a game where you're developing certain, say if you're going to level 87, the difference between level 87 and level 10 is that you've kind of practiced and you've known what's coming. But even then, there's always like unexpected stuff that can happen. But you just simply learn to expect the unexpected. And you learn that all you can really rely on is your own ability to be present in this moment and figure it out. That's how I see it. There's no like magic power object that's just going to get you through. There's no like technique. There's nothing you can hold on to that's going to really allow you to get better at this. But you can expect to have these experiences that shock you to the core. You can expect to have these like powerful, deep revelations, So people who say that, oh, it's all just a projection of the brain or the mind, that's really, they're not even playing the game. They haven't even started. They're just in the realm of like Western person circa 2020, a narcissistic control freak 101. That's where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting actually this point, because I had Chris Beige on. He was actually the first person that I interviewed, and one of the questions I asked him was this. He did lots of work with LSD, and I asked him, when you enter these states, how are you sure what it is exactly that you're experiencing? whether it's, you know, the nature of the cosmos or the nature of your psyche. And he did give me his answer. But for me personally, I'm at the stage where I still cannot find, I'm still on the fence. I still don't know exactly how to read what a psychedelic state is offering to the one who's undertaking it. So what has made you, you know, certain in reading it as an actual peering into the nature of reality and not just a projection?
Well, there's different levels of it too. Like some people will say, and I think it's a little bit, you know, I think it's a little bit of a sort of a technical, holier than thou understanding of reality, where you say, oh, it's all just the human reality itself. It's all just a projection of the one consciousness experiencing itself, right? So, you know, there is that, if you want to take that on board, that reality itself is a projection of one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively, right? So that's, you know, that's something that we have to take into account as well.
Yeah.
But there's different levels of experience that will move you. You know, you will, if you are moved, you have a visceral response where you are, for example, tears may come, emotions may rise, where you are visibly, Terence McKenna would talk about the DMT experience as one in which if you were to die of astonishment, if astonishment could kill you, you would die when you smoke DMT, because but parts of you are just trying to comprehend that this even exists. And it's very difficult to deny that it is. If you smoked enough and it's good quality crystal DMT or Changa, it's difficult to deny it at the time. It's pushing all these receptors and you're having this hyper vivid experience, which is blowing your mind. And at that point, you know, it's difficult to sort of say, oh, this is projection of the mind. But what will happen when you come back from it is, especially if you're a newbie, is your rational mind or brain is going to try and assert control. And that's what's really happening. It's the mind parasite, which is the most extreme way of calling it, is going to try and assert control and assert its boundaries because it wants to remain in control. But if you go back into those spaces, you're still going to have the same level of that kind of astonishment. But there's many different levels, you know. There's many things you can see that may be like comparatively 8-bit or 16-bit. And some of that just might be whatever, you know, that it can come from lots of different places, you know. So there's, you know, there's lots of phenomena that might not be particularly impressive, you know. And there might be phenomena that you experience where you feel that you've met the divine or that you have awoken to higher aspects of yourself. And so there's, you know, there's experiences where a lot of people report, for example, these banners where they see alien languages on banners, you know, for example. And this is like, for me, this is good enough evidence that there's really something going on here, because it makes no fucking sense at all that the mind or the brain would manifest or hallucinate something in an alien language on a banner that it can't read. There's just no logical sense of that. And so many people report that, that it's just, it would appear to be some sort of objective reality. And here's the thing, like, what? No one can read these alien, never met anyone who could read these alien languages. We can say we can compare notes and say they look sort of similar, but I think that this sort of phenomena can show us that okay, we're dealing with a signpost here, really, and it's literally a signpost as well, saying, "Here you are in an alternate dimension." Maybe the banner's saying, "You are in this and this such dimension. Hello, human."
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting for me, when people come back from these experiences and they kind of report the same reality or similar phenomena that they've seen or that have happened to them. So, but of course I've only kind of read or heard a few stories here and there, but this, for you, this is your life, so you've heard of many, you know, the experiences of many people, and you've had many experiences yourself. So I'm curious about some of the things that kind of appear again and again in these states, and specifically about entities, because like this is something that I'm really impressed by. I haven't really gotten into it. I don't know much about it. I just know that people report seeing entities, and I just wonder what form this takes and whether people kind of agree on the nature of these entities that they encounter.
Well, I think the entities question is very interesting, because what we're really talking about, from my perspective, is where humanity is at in terms of our relational understanding to reality itself. And the default mode of a lot of people in Western consciousness, they would say, oh, spirits, beings, they don't exist. We got rid of them in the 17th century when the Enlightenment came and we became rational and we gave up religion and all that superstitious bullshit. We got rid of, threw the baby out and got rid of the bathwater. And now it's just nuts and bolts reality. We don't have to worry about any of that. But if you go to a country like Brazil, for example, in Brazil, people have a much more spiritual awareness, because Brazil is a Catholic country, and you have, for example, you've got a movement called Spiritism, whereby there's dozens of these mental hospitals in Brazil where the psychiatrists and nurses are trained in exorcism to actually exorcise, negative, evil spirits from the patients before they enter the mental hospital. So this is something that's going on. So in a culture like Brazil, you pretty much meet no one who'll say the spirits aren't real. It's part of their culture. It's part of their culture indigenously. It's part of their culture in terms of Catholicism, and it's part of the new culture that they have, whereby there is a kind of syncretic spiritual awareness that brings together elements of indigenous traditional culture and new forms of spirituality. Channeling, for example, is part of, there's the I think, what do you call it, the Umbanda tradition in ayahuasca. It's all about channeling. And I've drunk with a New Age group in Brazil, and they do channeling as well. So that's, for them, it goes a little bit deeper than, seeing the spirits. So I think the Western culture is largely still at the stage of coming to terms with the existence of the spirits. But the spirits or the beings, I mean, some will say, oh, there's some discussion about, where they come from or what they are. And some will say, oh, they exist in the tryptamine space. They're the DMT beings. And that's not actually the case. Actually, when you understand the terrain, you'll understand that, we're living you know, our physical reality, and that there are many different realities, many different dimensions, many different beings. So all the beings and that you can experience, you might just experience one being one time and then meet thousands of beings who are completely different to that being. So there's this kind of, what would you call it? This kind of myth of the DMT elves. And I think it's kind of lazy language, just like
the machine elves.
Yeah, machine elves. What the fuck was he talking about there? You know, like, I mean, you know, when I was doing it and giving heaps of people, hundreds of people DMT, no one would say, yeah, I saw these elves with no machine elves with the pointy, you know, no one would talk about that. They'd have all these different experiences. They'd meet all these different beings. So I've only seen an angel once, and I've only seen a demon twice. So you just experience all these different entities and beings, and some people just don't experience them at all. And, you know, who knows what that's about? And there might be people who are really into DMT. They just don't experience the being. So I don't know why that is the case, why they don't. But for me, when I first started really getting into this, I'd experienced so many different beings. And, you know, it was always something that I think gave me a sense, an understanding that the universe was multidimensional, that it was filled with all these different kinds of life forms, and that it was perhaps a kind of parade showing me the extent of how life manifests into some sort of sentient consciousness, you know. So that's how it's always been for me.
And how did you tell the difference between these two demons and angel that you've seen, and kind of the other visions that you've had? What made them different that you said, oh, all right, this is like a sentient entity?
An ascension entity?
A sentient kind of.
Oh, sentient.
Yeah.
Well, the angel that I saw, it was a big blue angel with huge wings. And it flew over the top of me, and it had a horn, actually. So what I often find is these kind of like cliches about different beings, they actually generally turn out to, there's something to them. So the horn I found to be overwhelming. I felt that it wasn't loud, but it seemed to, like, if it would blow it much harder, it would blow me apart. And it didn't even blow it very loud. It just kind of tooted it over me. So that was when I experienced this angel. So the angel appeared to be, and I know other people who've met angels as well. It's not that common. People do, but it's not like hugely common, is that they appear to be quite impersonal and elemental. Mm-hmm. Whereas I have met fairies in my everyday consciousness when I got lost in the wilderness in Australia, in the rainforest.
Really?
At night. Yeah.
So what's a fairy like?
And the funny thing about the fairies is they appear very personable. They're not elemental at all. They're cheeky. They just look like the movies depict them to be. And the funny thing was that I got lost in this part of Australia called Mount Warning National Park, which is not Mount Warning, if people know Northern New South Wales in Australia. It's an area called Mount Warning National Park, which not many people go to. And most of it you can't access by foot easily. And Mount Warning National Park is where the Disney movie Fern Tree Gully about fairies is actually located.
Oh,
So I didn't know this until several years later, and I watched the movie and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then I found out the author of Fern Tree Gully lived in the area and would go out in nature and was inspired and got the story by going out in nature and then wrote it down.
wow.
You know? So the fairies look remarkably like the Disney versions of what fairies should look like. And their personalities, I would say their personality is a little bit more lewd, a little more cheeky, and a bit more psychedelic. But in general, and artistic, but in general, they look very similar to how movies depict them. So, you know, I do think that there is a big connection between the spirit world and the humans, especially now people are taking psychedelics. I had this experience once where I saw this huge being, well, not huge, about the size of Jabba the Hutt, straight up looking like Jabba the Hutt, flying over me. From some distance away, I could see this being. And I was like, what the hell is, that's Jabba the Hutt. So I immediately researched this, and I can't remember his name, but he's a very well-known effects creator or producer. And he used to take huge amounts of LSD
Really?
in his cupboard with his cat, and then come out with these crazy, you know, designs for these creatures. So, and then you have a figure like H.R. Geiger, who has a quote. He is a guy who created the alien out of aliens. And he said, he's got a quote where he says, some people think that I draw out of the imagination. This is not true. I draw from reality. Oh. So I've seen those alien beings, not exactly the same, but pretty fucking close, you know? So I think a lot of people would have resistance to acknowledging that an alien-like being exists, right? But perhaps they're taking this reality to be some sort of like non-creative game. Some sort of metaphysically correct or construct based upon their, you know, conclusions, metaphysical conclusions about what this reality is, you know. So I would say, yeah, from all of what I've seen, this reality there appears to be a lot of conflict, and there is a lot of predation as well. So it's not surprising that that is the case when we look into nature. We see that very prevalent in nature. So why would it be surprising that we don't see that within the different dimensionalities of which these etheric beings exist within?
So by predation, you mean the existence of malevolent entities that mean us harm?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my perspective is very similar to the perspectives, say, that the Gnostic Christians held, is that this reality is controlled by the archons who believe they control humanity. And so yeah, I see humanity as being in a state of parasitic infection, where the parasite in many respects has taken over the host. So for me, it's become a lot easier to forgive people and understand the insane circumstances that we live in, the nonsensical suffering and all the stuff. Like, I think a lot of people are coming to terms with why is there all this pedophilia being exposed in the highest levels of government all around the world, you know? And when you understand these entities and where they're coming from and what drives them and how they operate, you understand all this a lot more easily. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, was it you recently on Facebook, you posted that article about was it in Belgium, that case of higher pedophilia? I actually read that and I was like, I didn't, think that such things can happen in, our world, but apparently.
It's good you reminded me of that, because I came across it and it shocked me so much.
Yeah.
And it actually almost brought the government to its knees. There were massive demonstrations in the streets about it, because it basically implicated much of the establishment in Belgium related to this guy and the ritualized abuse of children. But, this is something that, I meet people who've been ritually abused, and this is going on a lot more commonly than people think. And so the ritual abuse, it appears to be creating food for these entities. That's how it appears to be. I know in South Africa, they don't have this ritual abuse, but the dark, you could say the people working with the dark, or the people in cahoots with the parasites, more like it, what they do and how they operate is they torture animals and children in order to provide food for the entities, and that they believe that gives them spiritual power. So this is the sort of thing that we're hearing all around the world in many different cultures. And I think we're living in a time when all this is becoming exposed more and more, even though a lot of people, want to keep their heads in the sand and not really look into it. We're beginning to see this being exposed in many different countries around the world. So, it seems to me that, at least from my perspective, this is where it's coming from, that the parasite is making these people do these things. It is actually inspiring them to do these things. So in any kind of rational, logical, sense, it doesn't actually make any sense unless you understand this kind of ritual abuse in those terms. So that's how I've come to see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's it's super interesting in these things that you're talking about and that you're exploring. But again, I think there's always this, if a rationalistic kind of reductionist, eavesdrops on our conversation right now, he'd be like, oh, this is such bullshit. It's just, I think the more kind of the rational side of humanity it really delves into rationality, and then there's this other side that we're more interested in the the unconscious and what is mysterious, what has always been a mystery, and then these kind of go in separate directions. So I think it's always good to kind of try to bring them closer to each other, so it can be kind of a hybrid process of growth. So, and that's why I think it's really important to talk about what happens in psychedelic states that has an impact on the rational daily reality. So for example, things like synchronicity, I think these are very interesting, because kind of a scientist can see that something objective comes out of the psychedelic state. So let's say somebody sees something in their experience, and then it manifests in real life. So can you talk a bit more about that, and like instances that you've that you've encountered of striking synchronicity that cannot be, explained away through coincidence or anything like that?
So many people experience these sort of crazy synchronicities. One comes to mind. It's quite funny, actually. I went to a church service, and it's not related to psychedelics at all. It's just something that happened to me. I went to this church service with my grandmother of the death of one of her old friends. And I bought a postcard of the church because I like the stained glass windows on the church. This is in Mount Macedon in Victoria in Australia. And so I bought the postcard. And then a couple of years later, I end up hitchhiking in the Flinders Ranges in South Australia, which is basically the desert. A car comes past every hour or two sort of thing. And this family picks me up, and they, feed me, and, we're talking, and, well, what do you do? And the guy says, oh, I'm a builder. Oh, what do you build? Churches. What kind of churches do you build? And he said, I built this church and that church. And he says that one of the churches he built was this church in Mount Macedon. So I go into my backpack and I pull out the postcard of the church that he built. And I think he was really shocked. So I suppose that's like, it's a relatively minor sort of synchronicity. I find maybe even more interesting than synchronicity are the circumstances that lead to the events in our life. Meeting this person who led me to that person who leads me to that person, for example, and how these supposed chance meetings can result in meetings with people who are very significant in your life. Yeah. Or the lives of others. So that sort of thing has struck me even more than synchronicity. And also thinking back, looking at how I viewed the circumstance at the time, how I knew that person they were no longer like a 2D person, that they stood out to me. There was a hyper reality to them. On some level, I knew that I needed to interact with them, So stuff like that, the more kind of nuanced, this is the word of the moment, nuance, sort of understanding of reality and how it communicates with us and creates our reality and what we experience as as chance or random, is actually that there's a greater, much more mysterious orchestration underlying our reality.
Yeah. No, for me, again, this has probably struck me the most. And again, it's very kind of subtle, the way that you're led from one person to the next and from one experience and situation to the next. And then it does seem like there is some direction and purpose behind it. But I'm also impressed by the fact that these sorts of things like synchronicity manifests more around psychedelic experiences, not even necessarily during the psychedelic session or whatever, but maybe even a few days before and a few days after, which is very interesting why a psychedelic experience session would have such a rippling effect in space and time that actually, goes out into the everyday reality.
Yeah, it seems that the psychedelics themselves appear to bring this connection from the inner world to the outer world much more strongly. So I don't actually find these days that I get that effect as much as I used to get it. And there are, say, if you take a psychedelic and you can actually and you do it among people, you can surf these waves of synchronicity. You can feel that your thoughts are manifesting in front of you, that you can even determine reality in some respect. And that can just sort of, you know, you can sort of surf that wave. I find that doesn't really happen to me so much anymore like it used to, and I don't have any good explanation as to why it doesn't, but maybe I got the message. I don't need to experience that, you know.
Yeah. And what about people who say that psychedelics are kind of a cheat, a way for, you know, lazy spiritual seekers to get ahead of the game without putting in effort? Because that's one of the key, you know, arguments of people who are against psychedelics. What do you answer to that?
Well, I would say such people might talk about enlightenment, and, you know, I don't believe in enlightenment. I don't believe in any end goal, you know. Enlightenment is the ultimate non-nuanced sort of result. It's like this mysterious golden carrot, but you don't really know what it is, but it's what you'll get if you do really well, and you know, it's sort of, I don't actually believe in that. You know, I do believe in experiencing an enchanted state of being, you know. I do believe in the manifestation of the human spiritual technology. So I think this whole perspective of spirituality, it tends to posit that we are risen apes, you know, that we are risen apes, and we are going to rise from the ape and, you know, emerge into a higher spiritual state, you know. Whereas my perspective is that humanity is in a very interesting and unique place, and there are many different forces and factors at play, and including the parasitic infection that I talked of. And so I would say that human beings in general, in especially the culture that I grew up in, you know, Australia, the Western culture, human beings live in a state of acute spiritual poverty. Our whole way of life is has moved away from our traditional religious viewpoints, which at least gave people a moral compass and foundation, and it gave them a sense of community and church and all that stuff. You know, a sense of meaning and purpose. And I think these days a lot of people are, they don't have that kind of like spiritual sort of background. So in terms of psychedelics being a shortcut, I don't see that this is that we're actually involved in this process of going towards a higher state, or that we're spiritually advancing. I'd see it as that we're actually healing, that we're actually coming, or at once we're individually, we're coming into greater resolution and clarity into our into who we are as spiritual beings. Because if you've grown up in the Western culture, you're pretty much being sold a version of reality in which there is no such thing as spirit, right? And we don't really know what that is. And then I think we have this idea of, there's these things such as enlightenment, whereby you're going to actually, you know, get this, you're actually going to have this, this ultimate experience of spirituality, So so in terms of the whole idea of spirituality in the first place, I think is a little bit silly in the first place. So there's no cheating, because I'd see that we're in dire straits, that we need to accept all the help we can get. It's not this, hey, I'm cool and normal and everything's great and I just want to become enlightened and spiritually advance myself from this, this place where I'm at, where I'm privileged enough to be able to think about that in the first place, So that's kind of, I've seen a lot of that. I lived in this area called Byron Bay in Australia, which JPC has called the most spiritual place on earth. And that wasn't a compliment. It was not a compliment at all. I lived in that fucking place for 10 years. So, and you know all the different characters and all the smug sort of philosophies and perspectives and arrogance. And it just becomes really tiresome and abstract and disconnected, and it becomes another dominated form of consciousness. So if I hear people say, oh, psychedelics is just another shortcut, it just sounds to me, it's just this sort of it's just this arrogant perspective, For someone like me, I work, I do boots on the ground work with people in ayahuasca states. It's not I can't even count on the people with one hand who drink ayahuasca and oh, I'm fine, I'm fantastic, life is brilliant, I'm just, you know what I'm saying, who are just I became enlightened or reached a higher level. It's not like that. This is not how life is. Life is way more complex than that. It just doesn't work like that. When you're talking about psychedelics or to bring it back to ayahuasca, you're actually just looking in to face your own shit, really, to see what kind of human being you are. It's not even about spirituality. Spirituality is just this artifact of this is a cultural artifact of a species is just, hasn't got a clue. So that's how I would see spirituality, not as any kind of valid realm in itself. So, say you drink ayahuasca, and a lot of people are drinking ayahuasca just to spiritually bypass, There's not necessarily that investigation of the self. They're not necessarily wanting to look at their shit. There's a lot of people who just taking it and talking to aliens and talking to Jesus. And that's really common, even though this concept of spiritual bypassing has been trending for a few years now, it's still the case that it's very common, because people are seeking these spiritual experiences. And a lot of people, they don't want to, they don't want to go deep inside themselves and see how messy and terrifying and crazy it is, because there's also this delusion that, everything, it's all good. It's all love and light. It's not. That idea in itself is a kind of deluded perspective. That is, that's the head in the sand reality. That is not actually, that is also a very privileged Western perspective. If you go traveling in, Africa or some South American countries, or, the Philippines, where I was just in January, it's difficult to maintain that perspective, because there's so much going on that's so very much creating human suffering. There's so much human suffering going on. There's so much going on in our reality that doesn't need to be the way that it is, So, yeah, I think that my short answer is there's nowhere to go in the first place. We're being humans having a human experience. There's no destination. So you're not cheating, you know, although I did talk about a game before. I was talking metaphorically in terms of levels and all that sort of thing. I'm more like talking about a depth of experience, you know, in being able to, more like someone who rides a bike and gets better at it, and you're able to do more tricks on the BMX or whatever it is, you know. So I would say that, yeah, anything that helps you to look at yourself and who you are and how you're being is really useful. And I think anyone who says psychedelics are a cheat and it's a shortcut, they have no idea at all. They are ignorant as fuck, basically.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that is actually a really complex and great answer. Thank you. Two questions came out of it for me. Maybe I'll start with, in the end, you touched on evil and kind of darkness, which exists in the world just as much as light and good. So, what lessons have psychedelics, or just your life, you know, as a seeker, however you describe it, what lessons have you learned about how to, you know, approach evil and darkness? Do you fight it? Do you integrate it? What do you do about it?
Well, when I first began coming across evil, I did try and integrate it. And at that point, you know, I was living in Byron Bay at the time, in that shire, and there was a lot of the Advaita going on at the time. There was a lot of this, Advaita means not to. So there was a lot of these spiritual teachers coming out of the realm of, like, you know, the Gangajis and Papajis and the GGGs. That was really quite a phenomena in the early noughties. There was a lot of that, this non-duality going on. So yeah, I was influenced by that. It's not as sexy and cool as it used to be. But yeah, that you know, there's still people who are approaching that. And so my perspective was, in a way, trying to, in a way, integrate and assimilate and come into absolute relationship with any of the evil beings that I would meet. And this technique works. It's quite good, and I don't practice it anymore. I'm aware, and I have used, if that's the right term, it's not really a technique that you can use. Maybe some people can, but where you're acknowledging the divine of these beings, you know, you're namasteing them out of existence, but in divine love, you know. I have had that experience, but it's not something that I can flick a switch and turn on at will. But I know some people can, because all the beings that we meet, the evil beings, they're all a part of creation as well. They exist for a reason. And if you can acknowledge that reason and understand them and why they exist, and they will respect that and probably just leave you alone or go away or whatever. So I have a friend who this is, I guess, one example of it. He said that he was being attacked by this being, and he was trying to understand it, and he understood that the being was just trying to get food for its child, for its baby. And he saw an image of its baby in the nest waiting for mum to come back with a little bit of, you know, a chunk of humaniferic juice or goo or whatever it is, you know. And and so he saw that, and he realized that, oh, the baby's actually kind of cute. And, that situation is kind of sweet. And even though it was a little bit macabre, and the being saw that he saw this and realized that he was actually, that this sort of big dragon entity, couldn't actually go after him because he had realized that he had empathized and understood her circumstance, to that he in a way made, we would say humanized, or kind of like resonated or had empathy with that being to the point where it had empathy for him and realized that he couldn't be treated as a regular enemy human, So, I think that in any situation, empathy will get you a long way. If you are in a situation where you are having to deal with some bad guys in our reality, whether they be, gangsters or police or politicians or bureaucrats or people, robbers or whatever it is, empathy will get you a long way with them too. And just seeing their soul in a way. I had a circumstance happen where I was in Johannesburg, where I spent quite a lot of time, and most friends of mine in Johannesburg, they have not had real problems with, getting robbed, or a lot of them have been robbed, but they haven't, I know one guy who got killed recently, actually, but it's got a seriously bad reputation, which is maybe a little bit over the top. But I did have one circumstance where I was driving in the inner city area, where I had to drive because had an Airbnb near there, which was relatively safe area to live, but it just was near the inner city, which is a dodgy area. And I had this car, which was, I think it was like a Chevrolet Ute, and you had to manually lock it because my friends let me this car. Well, normally in South Africa, you close the doors and the door locks, right? But often I'd forget, because I'm from Australia, you don't have to lock the doors when you're driving. I'd forget to lock it. So in this case, it was unlocked. And I arrive at the traffic lights behind like two cars in this kind of urban area. And these two guys emerge in front of me, kind of screaming and shouting. And I think, oh, well, my mobile phone is right there. Like, oh, they're going to do a smash and grab now. They're going to smash the window and grab my mobile phone. Or they're going to pull me out of the car and they're going to take the car. So I'm just like, I surrendered to this immediately because I know this has happened to other people, right? And so I'm like, okay. I'm like, hi, I'm Julian from Australia. And I was looking them in the eyes and they immediately froze. They just, you could see them kind of, they're both hanging there. It's like they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to respond. And South African people said to me later, they said, yeah, like we wouldn't even be able to look at them and they were not able to look at you. And I was like, that's why they got so discombobulated. It's so hard to acknowledge the humanity of someone when you're fucking them over, right? Yeah. When you're communicating your humanity to them and they're not used to it and they're professionals, they're doing it all the time. You're the odd one out, because if you're doing something like this, you find there's a predictive, there's a predictive response you're expecting, right? And then you're the predator. So in that circumstance, I had this like odd introduction. I'm looking at them and they kind of looked away, a bit freaked out. Like I'm talking this slow down, relaxed, imagine you're a predator. Why is he relaxed? Doesn't make any sense. Why is he introducing himself to us? It's crazy, right? So this was my natural response. And I think maybe psychedelics had helped me into this space of surrender and knowing what to do. And at that point, and I was watching that, and I was like, oh, and they don't know that the doors are actually open. They can just get my phone or whatever. They don't know that. And they're trying to think what to do. By that point, the traffic lights had changed. No, not traffic lights didn't change. The car in front of me moved forward like 3 feet. So I just moved forward 3 feet as well. And the guys were like, oh, and they had to move out of the way because I was not like, you know, I was definitely going forward 3 feet. And then the traffic lights changed and I drove off and nothing happened. So, you know, maybe that's a good example of that technique, which is really, it's not so much acknowledging the divine within, but it's having empathy and seeing that the person that you're having difficulty with is a human being, and that you're not like a robotic, you know, a person who can be fucked over, that you're actually a human being too, or that you're actually some sort of sentient life form that means something. And I think as soon as you see that meaning in any life form, you can go a long way, you know. Mm-hmm. And I've used that technique in many hairy circumstances I found myself in my life. You know, you just got to be able to make contact with the person, and yeah, that can help get you out of some tricky circumstances.
Yeah. Well, all right. So you talk about this cultivating compassion and understanding, and kind of working on your self, kind of your weaknesses, your insufficiencies, and also growing and helping, you know, others grow as well. So this is kind of your life. This is what you aim your work at. At the same time, you don't like the word spirituality and the word enlightenment and awakening. So what word would you use for this kind of approach to life, where you want to give rather than take, and, you know, you want to grow rather than shrink away?
I think it's rational. I think it's a rational approach, you know, because that when you give to life, when you have something to offer, and when you have something to give to people, when you have something to offer to people, when you give value to people, you are recognized by them, and they recognize your value, and they see your worth, and they acknowledge you, and that makes your life easier. I think I was talking before about how men compete with one another to get a higher status, you know, and then to fight each other to actually, you know, to create negative rumor or gossip to put their competition on a lower status. I think that, in my understanding, the way that a logical, rational kind of end result in sharing and giving value and acknowledging people, having empathy for people, is that you gain status within your community of primates. And this is there's been some research done on this. I wouldn't be able to give you the reference for it right now, but where it is actually the alpha male in the community who is the one who shares the most, who is the one who gives the most, and the one who has the most to offer, because they're the most talented and capable. So that's why they're valuable, and they've given that position within the monkey hierarchy. And the human beings have kind of fucked up this natural order, I would say, because, and I think Jesus actually, he said the greatest among you, what was the quote exactly? He says that the greatest among you should be the one serving the rest of you, basically, something like that.
Yeah.
And in the human realm, it's often, well, the king is just the one with all the bling and the diamonds and the gold and the harem, and he just gets all this shit and just sits on his throne and does nothing. So, you know, if we lived in a natural order of circumstance, wouldn't it be the king? Wouldn't it be the one at the top who is actually being the one who everyone else in the community most revered and most had allegiance to and believed, who is most their leader, because he or she or they would be the one who could give everyone else that hit of, you know, perhaps those coordinates, that sense of belonging, maybe an understanding, or whatever it is. So I think that this is in our reality, or at this point in our evolution, where we're not as evolved as our chimpanzee brethren, who have a kind of natural order. So I think that yeah, basically that my perspective is you know, it makes sense rationally on every level to be in such a way where you're empathizing with those around you and seeing where they're at, and really helping them to ultimately get to where they want to get to in their life, and experience what they want to experience, and ultimately to heal and evolve and become closer to themselves and the divine. So that's what I would see as a way of being that is going to give you a good standing in the eyes of other human beings. Whereas, you know, someone like Bill Gates, I mean, you know,
you're not a fan.
Like, he's got all this money, and I think he's approaching everything from this quite masculine, in a way, engineering perspective, but it's like, it's not really, I don't think that people really respect his work, you know. I mean, when I meet people who work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they don't say, I work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, how great am I? They say, oh, they have to squirm a little bit and look down and admit to you that they work. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because they're expecting the worst. So, yeah, no, Bill Gates is not like, I wouldn't say that. I think that Bill Gates puts on a good show, or puts on a good, he puts on a good pretense of actually helping humanity. But is humanity really becoming more advanced, evolved, healed, able? I'd say no. You know, he's really trying to, for example, spending a lot of money on diseases that are just kind of boring, like polio, that, you know, kind of patching things up that probably should have already been patched up, but not really augmenting the human experience, or truly making people's lives better. I mean, it would be very, I mean, you know, it'd be very interesting to see, but I don't think that there are like millions of people who are inspired by, Bill Gates and his work, or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I'd say Elon Musk, he has a greater vision. He has a passion and a vision that's much greater, that's inspiring to people. Yeah. That people are inspired that he wants to go to Mars, even if they might not agree with him. They are inspired by his ability to get all this different stuff done on a very practical level, to be this, in charge of all these different companies that do all this different stuff and develop high quality, really interesting technology. People are inspired by that, for sure. I would say he kind of would sort of exemplify someone who is, giving a profound sense of value of what is possible in terms of, in terms of our technological perspectives, and also in terms of what it's possible to say and how it's possible to get away with and do as well, in terms of, and being with it and responding to our present age, and by posting all these crazy memes on his Twitter and whatever it is. Yeah. So anyway, I might be getting off the track there with that. I was about to talk about Donald Trump there. We won't go there.
No, but I really like this idea that the virtuous way of life is the rational way of life. I think, I don't know how you feel about Jordan Peterson, but like a loose reading of his idea of God is that, through the ages, people, generation after generation, we've observed what makes a person valuable to the community. And these different traits that make a person valuable, we have called them virtues. And then we started, collecting them all together around the center. And then this becomes our idea of God, the ultimate alpha, essentially, the king of kings. So essentially his idea is that this religious notion of the virtuous person, of the just person, of the follower of God and of God himself or herself or whatever, is, it basically gives people a model without necessarily explaining it in detail, but just using the language of symbols and poetry. It's conveying this idea of how a person should act, and that it's rational to act in a virtuous way, to go forward in life and help other people move forward as well.
Well, that's very clear to me. That's very, very obvious to me that in my human experience, that, it's simply logical, rational, obvious, and evident that there is a way of getting things done that is sensible, and that way is, that is altruistic. That actually true altruism is helping others. True selfishness is helping others. Like Ayn Rand would say, "Oh no, altruism is, you should be just looking after," it's kind of this American idea. And funnily enough, Ayn Rand was Russian. But it's this idea that she really stoked the fire, that no, altruism was a weak, kind of pitiful attempt to try and help people. But no, you conquer the world. You deserve the castle on the hill and all the bling and, this sort of attitude, all the power because you're the best. And I think she did a good job at seducing a lot of very able, competent people to thinking that there was, virtue and meaning in being a selfish cunt of a prick, and not actually operating in a way whereby you were cultivating a perspective where it was primarily your human relationships that give your life meaning, and the networks that you develop that enable your functionality, even at the very highest level of wealth and power. It is your ability to connect and your ability to network, and your ability to network and connect is often based upon your ability to have empathy and understand people. That is the most powerful thing. And I've come to understand, what I call friendliness is really maybe the most powerful thing that we have, as human beings. Like, you may not be good at a lot of things, but if you have the ability to build rapport with people, if you have the ability to connect, and you have the ability to allow others to really feel that they're seen and understood, that will take you very, very far. That will take you an extremely long way. But getting back to this idea, and for me, it's not an idea, it's an obvious reality. It's like, yeah, in terms of what an individual wants most in their life, I think that, yeah, it is by giving value to other people and sharing whatever is of value to other people, that will enable you to have these relationships with other people. I think being the kind of guy in the castle on the hill who everyone in the town hates because they have all the money and the bling and the babes is really not a very good way to live your life. I wouldn't want to live like that. I think that human beings are so disconnected from humanity. They're so disconnected from themselves and each other. They don't really understand what they're doing and what they're doing it for. And so they just default to the bling and the babes, And that's just really primitive, primordial stuff that it's kind of nonsensical bullshit. It's a mental illness which consumer capitalism is based on, that we're supposed to be just accumulating money to accumulate goods, accumulate power, all that sort of stuff. Power is only, okay, say you have power and you have power over other people. It's like, if your power over other people is just them being fearful of you and you kind of screwing them over and taking all their bling for yourself, I mean, it's like, how are you going to feel about yourself then as a human being? Probably not that great. You're probably not going to feel in your heart of hearts that you're actually probably a good human being. You're not helping your spiritual evolution, if we want to use the S word again. You're going to be helping your spiritual evolution by helping other people to spiritually evolve. That's how you're going to be helping your spirit, and that's going to make you feel good. It's like basic, mirror neuron science at work here. So yeah, I think that, for me, in terms of taking psychedelics and being an aware person, all this has become evident to me. And I don't know if it's a shortcut. I just think it's seeing things clearly, right? It's seeing things rationally and not through the lens of society or conditioning or ideology, which is generally, lead you down some bullshit path, or intellectualism, or academic thinking, or any of the ways of seeing the world in terms of the mental artifice, rather than seeing the world and human life and existence as it is, because you're seeing it as it is. And that's what a lot of people are not doing, because they're just living in this abstract, ideological overly complex mental world where they're consumed by the mind parasite. So that's what I would say. Like, I've come to understand things as they are, and that yeah, I don't see that as a shortcut. I just think that's a good thing, because you don't want to see things as they are not. But I do think how a lot of what is going on in society is people seeing things and doing things in terms of a kind of abstracted, divorced, removed, detached, disconnected view of human reality based on ideology and neoliberal thinking and, politicized, polemical polarities, which we are even seeing, a little bit of that emerge in the psychedelic space, presumably. But, pretty much assume that if people are talking about polarized political spaces, they're just not doing psychedelics, or whatever they're getting their hands on is some fucking bullshit.
Well, Julian, we're nearing the second hour, and before we end, I wanted to to ask you to talk a bit more about your work and your projects. I know that you have the Articulations book. I know that you're working on a new documentary series. Also, I read that you're working on innovative film erotica, which this sounds very interesting. So which ones are you free to talk about and would like to talk about?
I'm free to talk about all of them. Yeah. So pretty much I wrote Articulations in 2010, so quite a long time ago, but it took me 4 years to edit it. And I wrote my new book, Resolution. Well, I wrote it pretty much from 2015, 2016, and it's taken me until now till it's presentable. And Resolution is a book about the possibilities for the human species, understanding what I would see as where the human species is really at and the possibilities of, and I suppose I'm writing from the perspective of seeing the human species as it is, presuming to have an insight, some sort of like relationship to where things are now, and writing from an understanding of that relationship, having traveled to 83 countries and just being someone who's trying to understand where things are at, and writing from the perspective and understanding, coming back to what would a society look like whereby if we were living from primary human values, if we were living from a society where, okay, well, the king is the one who is providing the most value to everyone else, if indeed in a supposedly evolved society you'd have a king at all, So I'm sort of inquiring into that and many different aspects of the conundrum of where we're at and what I think our possibilities are, and how sort of contemplating them. So that I'm going to try and finish that this year, but it's always in the proofreading and just getting it out and all the little details. It takes a while to do that. Mm. So the docuseries is, I did the docuseries because I thought that I wanted to start to do a filmmaking project that was not too hard to do, that I felt was able to communicate about something that I knew a lot about, which is the Australian psychedelic scene. So I interviewed over 50 people about psychedelics in Australia. And Australia has a very advanced psychedelic scene. Kalindi EU, who died of COVID-19 in April, actually, he would come to conferences in Australia, just as initially just as a punter, someone who'd come along. He said Australia, the scene in Australia was light years ahead of anywhere else. Mm. And I think he was onto something, because it certainly is quite a healthy scene. And so I wanted to really kind of pick the brain of all these different people I knew. And I interviewed 50 people. It wasn't quite at random, but I could have interviewed 200 people easily, or 300 people. Just happened to be those people were just the ones I interviewed, and it worked out, and it seemed obvious that they were the ones. But I could have interviewed a whole lot of people, because I've been in this scene a while. I know a lot of the people in it who are the ones who have some insight into this. So I wanted to really pick their brains about their wisdom, about what they've understood, because we have all this emphasis now, or we have all this emphasis just in general about information. You know, we're still stuck in this information as power idea, whereas I believe information is meaningless. You know, I don't have any process. You know, people say, oh, there's so much information now. How can we deal with all this information? I'm like, yeah, but most of it's ridiculous and not worth processing or understanding at all, you know. So I don't have an issue with that. I think that the issue is that we have this idea that information is important. Whereas I would say what's important is wisdom. What's important is understanding. What's important is having a good awareness, or an experiential understanding of how things are. So I was really trying to capture that in people about psychedelics, because a lot of what we're experiencing in the psychedelic world is just these, like, scientific research shows that psychedelics do this and it helps with anxiety and depression, and it doesn't really help people to understand their own psychedelic experiences. It doesn't help people to prepare or integrate their own psychedelic experiences. So I wanted to really capture and understand the wisdom of all these people, so people could watch this and go, oh, right. They could understand and have a good awareness of how, for example, there's a whole section about integration, how to integrate, what steps to take that people think, what things to take into account when you're in the process of integration. So yeah, I did have a retreat that was planned in the Northern Territory of Australia, but now whole of Victoria is under lockdown. We've got a second wave happening. Sydney people can't travel to the Northern Territory. Now Brisbane people can't. That's most of Australia right there. And most of the people who are going to go to my retreat. So I'm pretty much going to be able to finish that documentary. And so under lockdown, you know, I've been able to sort of finish most of this, these projects, the book and this docuseries. And in terms of in the next project, there's a few that are probably that are going to happen. But the erotic films has been something that I've been aware of, that I've needed to do for a long time. And I've been so caught up in all this other work that I haven't had much of breathing space to do it. So maybe in 2021 sometime, after these projects are done and dusted, I can start making erotic films that are actually not based around Catholic guilt and shame and reductionistic, materialistic sexuality based upon the ideology of pleasure and divorce from human relationship and connection and the convergence of the masculine and feminine technology. So there's whole, there's so much capacity and potential within the realm of the human relationship. And for us humans, it's sexuality where we begin to understand that. So I'd see where we are evolutionarily. I'd say that it's a good time to depict and demonstrate the awareness of that relationship in respectful and artistic and creative terms, so that people can be inspired to pursue these avenues. Whereas I was doing a Facebook Live about, talking a little bit about sexuality, and someone said, "Isn't it just for making babies?" And I was like, okay, all right, okay, so, all right. My answer to this, and I didn't answer at the time, is like, well, it's quite interesting that we have this thing within us, and I think many people would see that, oh, it feels good and we get pleasure from it. I would say yes, but the pleasure is just a byproduct of deeper meanings and potentials. So I would say we don't even really know what we're doing yet. I'd say I don't really know what I'm doing yet, but I have a big understanding that there's shit tons I don't know and that I don't understand. So it's this old chestnut of you don't know what you don't know. And I'd say in terms of human relationship, a lot of people are just at the stage where maybe they're not allowing themselves to understand that they don't know. There's much that they don't know, and they're just, kind of closing it off, that there's all these potentials and available to them. Perhaps it's just too scary for people. Maybe it's too intense. Maybe it's too scary. I'm not sure, But I think it's one of the most interesting realms within the human sphere. One of the most powerful that we have is sexuality. And what are we doing with it? Nothing much. We're pretty much abusing it. We're pretty much just fucking around as a species, and we're fucking around as a species because we're fucking around sexually. So I would say, yeah, it's something important that we need to look at, and we're certainly not going to have an answer from this kind of, we're not going to get an answer in wearing white robes and, namasteing one another and lighting a candle and thinking we're spiritual and all this sort of thing. So much deeper than that. And hopefully I can help people to see those depths somehow, because it's not that easy to capture as well. So challenging.
Yeah, I was about to say, like what you're talking about, abuse of sexuality, the kind of modern obsession with pornography is like one of the, kind of more, like the most intense expressions of this abuse. And like so many people run into, porn addiction and stuff like that. But you're essentially taking almost like the weapon of the enemy, which is the, this ignorant way of approaching sexuality, and using it to kind of find some deeper meaning, which I find very exciting.
Yes, no, I'm excited as well. I think that I'm just surprised. I've been talking about it for years, I was talking about my book for years before I wrote that too. But you know, it's one of these things where, no, it's not easy to do actually, because of many factors. And I mean, it's just, I think that people are just a little bit lazy in terms of people making these films, but also I think it's not helpful, the models that of sexuality that are presented to children, teenagers, adults. They're, for one thing, it's manufactured, it's not even real. You've got these kind of beauty standards which are just like, you know, like I heard recently that there's this massive rise on these women having their bits of the labia cut off, because in pornography, a lot of the actresses have had they just have these perfect, like, they don't even have a labia, right? They're just like, you know, shaved and just like, you know, so a lot of, so females growing up and they have a labia that's like not, you know, looks like it's just not there, which is the pornographic model. They actually want to get it cut off. So this is a huge issue. And then you have a version of sexuality that's fake, for one thing, in which there's no intimacy really, where it's presented that it's kind of, they're like, you know, this sort of, you know, there's this slapping going on. It's like, oh yeah, I like it really mean and nasty. And it's like, what are you talking about, mean and nasty? Like, I don't think I'm alone. I was like, what's this? Is like some sort of weird guilt and shame-based Christian programming that we're seeing in action. So, you know, there are some people doing some okay stuff out there, but there's not any sense. I think that what's important, and I certainly do think there are people in the Tantra community who are doing some powerful work, and that there's certainly some, you know, gems of wisdom and understanding in that too. But I think that, you know, I think it's important that people understand that hey, there's some real meaning in this. There's something important that at this point we're missing, and we're doing a great disservice to each other by facilitating this like fake plastic meaningless void, and then getting addicted to it because it's the only model of sexuality generally that you're able to find. I mean, I can't watch it. Like, I can't get aroused by it. I can't watch it. I mean, and I think it's harmful. So, you know, hopeful. And people say about pornography that it is harmful because it's like a high dopamine state, and then you can't get aroused by a real, you know, man or woman. And I think, you know, my only qualm is like, maybe I'll create shit that's so good, people just get too aroused, and it's just gonna be like they're just not gonna be able to copulate with anyone, you know. I don't know. I think there is that theory about it that it creates too much of a high of a dopamine state. I don't know. I tend to think that it may be creating a kind of like fucked sort of brain state. I don't think it's as reductionistic as high dopamine. I think it's just creating a kind of fucked, very primitive, discombobulated, disconnected state. And that's not, you know, when you're actually having to relate to someone in a real way sexually, you know, it doesn't, you know, there's a big disconnect. So, you know, I think that, it's important. And I'm being surprised when people say to me things like, oh, this is, you know, this is Satan leading you away from your real work, or, or aren't you concerned about what people think of you? You know,
it's again that shame and guilt you were talking about.
Yeah, and it's huge. The shame and guilt is huge. I mean, we're basically, you know, if you're of white European descent, you've had you know, pretty much at least 1,000 years of, you know, shame and guilt being heaped upon you related to your sexuality, that, you know, you're going to hell, it's wrong, it's evil, when it's actually like, no, if it's carried out correctly and appropriately and respectfully, it can be a way that you're not actually imprisoned by the flesh, that you actually awaken to the potentialities of the soul and spirituality itself. So, you know, whereas people like Willem Reich, he said about Jesus, that there's no way that Jesus would have reached his level without a profound understanding of human sexuality, you know, or profound awakening to an initiation via sexuality. So, yeah, I think in terms of, you know, psychedelics have awakened me to, in one aspect, the visual erotic stimuli, which I've experienced, which is nothing like, you know, the stuff you can get, you can download on your computer, is nothing like the stuff that I've seen when I've taken the psychedelics. And I know a lot of people are seeing the same sort of stuff. And it's also made me aware of and really hit home that, hey, you know, it's not you know, the foundations of relationship are significant and important. You can't simply just ignore those foundations and expect to spiritually advance or evolve. And I see, especially in the Western psyche or culture, you have, like I said, at least 1,000 years, maybe 1,500 or more years of, I would say, an attempt by the bad guys, you know, to really knock out that potential within, you know, via its mechanism, the church. Whereas if you read, say, the Bible or the New Testament, really, Jesus doesn't say anything about sexuality. That's all stuff that got put in there later, you know. That's just all complete, you know. That's just not, that's not helpful. So, yeah.
I'm super excited about this project. I very strongly agree that we are kind of, you know, desperately in need of a second look into, you know, sexuality, and also the erotic images and experiences that come up in psychedelic sessions. I think, at least personally, I haven't come across enough people talking about this and taking it seriously. And I think it's like really good work that you're doing, that you're actually putting the spotlight on this, because I think there's really something in there to be found.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting what you say. It just goes to show how unseriously people take sexuality, or how dimly and what a limited view they have of sexuality, that they think it's not a serious thing. It's just like, oh, that's just nothing. That's just a biological function. It's not important. Yeah, it feels good at the time, but then I just like to watch Netflix afterwards, you know. But yeah, I'm not, this is not necessarily my area. I'm aware of quite a few people who have acquired an advanced awareness and understanding of human sexuality. They're certainly out there. So, but yeah, there are these potentials, and it is something that we should take seriously, and we should, and if we did, I think our whole culture would change, and our society would become more mature, and we would actually, we would actually become mature. That's why I have, related to the question of, the quest of individual enlightenment, because we exist within a culture, within a society, a certain evolutionary stage, we're all of us are very much a product of our time and circumstance, you know, and you know, the whole idea of like somehow just rise above it and I'm enlightened, yeah, I'm gonna, you know, take off in a rocket ship, see you later, guys, I'm out of here. You know, that's you know, that's death. You know, if you want to like, you know, really check out the other dimensions, yeah, the human realm isn't the place to do that, in my opinion. The human realm is a place to experience what it is to be a human being and understand what's going on here. And at this point, you know, in evolutionary terms, we're not really we're not, you know, in a cultural level, really growing and understanding and evolving within the most basic form of relationships. In fact, a lot of what's going on now is profoundly dysfunctional, and sexual dysfunction is very, very common. Mm-hmm. And that just speaks of how people are not connecting and how people are not actually relating to one another. You know, whereas our model is just purely physical. It's just like, oh, it's just this. It's all about these pieces of meat meeting each other. It's just, yeah. You know. Anyway, talk about this for a long time.
Yeah. Well, it's. I think in general, all the great sages would agree with you. Like, for example, in Buddhism, the really great sages that are remembered and did matter say that nirvana is found in the midst of samsara. So it's all about awakening here, right now, and, you know, not escaping, but kind of going deeper. But it has been such a pleasure talking with you. Before I let you go, just for people watching, where can they find, you know, links or, you know, more information about your projects?
Well, I have a YouTube channel, so you can just look up my name, Julian Palmer. I've got all these videos on there, so a lot of people like to watch them. And I've got a website, julianpalmerism.com. And I've got 2 email lists. One is a workshops email list about all my events. And I probably update that one every 2 weeks, every month. You really want to keep up with what I'm doing. You know, I put a lot on there, and you follow me on Facebook. I make updates there. And I've got a writing email list, which is more stuff that doesn't get posted anywhere else. That's not so often, but you can also find me there. But julianpalmerism.com, that's pretty good. And yeah, all the Facebook and my email list, if you're really interested, it's all in there.
Nice. So I'll put all of these links in the description so people can easily find them. And once again, I really thank you very much for your time. It's been like really a great experience talking with you, and I wish you all the best with all your projects. And I look forward to reading Articulations, which I haven't, and to reading your